My case study was done on Linda Hernandez. The purpose of my research was to analyze her acts of espionage, look at her life history, and determine what possible psychological issues might be present, as well as what motivations she may have had. Linda was born on May 26th in 1955. She received a master's in library science from the University of Puerto Rico and a certificate from the Advanced Executive Program from Kellogg Institute at Northwestern University in Chicago. She was executive director for El Nuevo Dia Orlando newspaper. She was the president of Puerto Rico Broadcasting Corporation. She directed operations of the corporation, which included working for public radio and television stations in Puerto Rico. She became the vice president and news director for a TV channel for 20 years. She was a professor of television production at American University in Puerto Rico, a founder and director of Bibliographical Investigation Center in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and on the side, she served as a board member for the United Way of Puerto Rico. She developed promotional campaigns towards the fight against domestic violence and prevention of AIDS. She later married Nilo Hernandez, and they had a son together. The mission was sent from the Cuban president Fidel Castro. It consisted of mailing anonymous, misleading, and threatening letters to the U.S. political figures. They were asked to infiltrate U.S. military installations, disrupt exile groups, and manipulate media and political organizations. They went by Manilo and Judith when they were spying. Linda and her husband Nilo were referred to as the Juniors, and part of a 10-member ring in which they were all working together to do their damage. They snooped on U.S. military installations and Cuban exile organizations for the Cuban government. They counted airplanes as they took off from the Homestead Air Reserve Base and reported back to the military intelligence in Havana, Cuba. They also monitored boat movement on the Miami River, tried to infiltrate the Latin American Chamber of Commerce, and parked outside the Fort Bragg's military base in North Carolina to report on the U.S. troop movements. Investigators found discs in Veramontez's apartment. Veramontez was the Cuban military captain and was leading the spy group, using computers with coded material on discs to communicate with one another. FBI agents arrested the couple in their home in Miami in September of 1998. Interestingly, their responses were apologetic. Today, we truly are sorry that we are part of the group that was an instrument of the Cuban government, says Linda. I would like to express my apologies to this court, to the U.S. government, to my son, and to everybody for what I did, because I believe that I did wrong and I take full responsibility for that. Nilo. It struck me, though, the differences in the way of representing their sympathy. Linda mentions that we are sorry for being a part of the group, where her husband Nilo doesn't use the term we. He takes full responsibility, blaming it on himself, and recognizes that his actions are separate from everyone else's, that he could have acted differently. And I'm not so sure that that's what Linda was realizing. Although I could be wrong, I feel as though she was more sorry that they got caught. The proof that was found consisted of thousands of pages of coded messages retrieved from computer disks and paraphernalia from the Hernandez home. They found photo equipment, walkie-talkies, radios, city and transit maps, wigs, temporary hair color, different colored contact lenses, list of telephone booths, and a book, Alpha 66 and its historic works, dedicated to Linda and signed by Alpha 66's leader, Andres Nazario Sargent. Alpha 66 is a U.S.-based former terrorist organization and currently just a military organization formed by Cuban exiles in Puerto Rico in 1961, whose primary purpose was to overthrow the communist government of Cuba founded by Fidel Castro. Their motivations were unclear to me. Linda mentions that they did it not for material interest or enrichment, so that raised the question of what did they do it for? Was Linda intimidated by others? Was she guilted into it, and did she think it was her duty to quote-unquote help? Was she just doing it for the thrill of spying? Did she maybe do it for love, where she was persuaded by her husband? Or was she maybe the one to persuade him? If I were able to interview Linda, I would ask her more questions about her childhood. I would be interested in her relationship with family members or other loved ones. I would ask how she got involved in espionage in the first place, where she was so involved in doing good for her community and already seemingly so successful. I would ask her to be honest, if she felt guilty or if she was more sorry about getting caught, or if she maybe felt both. And I would ask her to elaborate on what she meant when she said she felt they were doing the quote-unquote right thing. What exactly did you feel was right about spying and going against somebody who you were trusted by? Although my sources were reliable, there was not enough information for me to evaluate possible psychological issues or motivations. Most information I found was focused on the fact that this was such a large group effort. There was little information focusing on the individuals themselves. I would have liked to get a little more information on Linda's childhood and if there were any signs of neglect or poor relationships that may have led to depression or any other psychological issues motivating her to commit these acts. Where she seemed so successful in her education, previous careers, and extracurriculars, I would think that maybe she had a quote-unquote normal childhood, but maybe she just got carried away with success and became greedy, needing and wanting more. What I found most interesting about this case was how it was so different from other cases. This was the largest spy group I have learned about, which raised questions for me, because with such a large group, wouldn't they figure it would make them more susceptible to getting caught? And how did they all assume they could trust one another? Where they were already willing to spy, they could easily be motivated to turn on each other, couldn't they? Or work for somebody else? Which then some of them could have gotten away, and others would have been found guilty. I was also confused by their reactions to the later interviews. Typically, in the cases I have studied, the spies had a hard time admitting to doing something so wrong. Some of them would say they made mistakes, but they didn't commit to any acts of espionage. Others would say they didn't think they even did anything wrong. So for the Hernandezes to say that they were wrong and to apologize for what they did, they stood out from any other cases.